The antenna had been misaligned for 11 days. Tomás Veyra knew this because the survey relay data had been running a consistent 4-degree azimuth error since the 14th, and because he had submitted 2 maintenance requests through the proper channels and received, in response, the specific quality of institutional silence that meant the proper channels were busy with something they considered more important. He had submitted a 3rd request this morning as a formality, already wearing his work jacket, already knowing he would be on the eastern perimeter before noon with a calibration kit, and the resigned competence of a man who has learned that waiting for permission and waiting for help are, in most frontier postings, the same thing. Carroll's Reach was not a beautiful place. It had not been designed to be. It sat at the outermost edge of humanity's surveyed space like a sentence that had run out of words. A cluster of prefabricated structures anchored to a plateau of iron-red rock, surrounded on 3 sides by a dust basin that the local weather system treated as a personal project. The survey company had established it 7 years ago because the geological formations beneath the plateau showed promising readings for 3 different categories of extractable resource, and had staffed it with the kind of people who did not object too strenuously to remoteness. Experienced field technicians, a small logistics team, a medical officer who moonlighted as the settlement's most reliable card player, and Tomás, who had taken the posting because the previous one had ended badly, and because Carroll's Reach was, in the most literal geographic sense, as far from that particular memory as he could get while remaining employed. He liked it here, in the way that people who need quiet learn to like the places that provide it. The work was straightforward. The days were long and the light was wrong, too red, too flat, the star at this system's center burning in a register that made everything look slightly like the hour before a storm, even when no storm was coming. But the relay towers were interesting problems, and the geological data was genuinely remarkable. And there was something clarifying about working at the edge of things, about being in a place where the next surveyed system was 3 weeks away, and the one after that hadn't been named yet. He had the calibration kit open on the equipment flat beside the antenna base, and he was 3/4 through the azimuth correction when the sounds started. He did not know what the sounds were. He would not know fully for several days. What he registered in the moment was a combination of things his body processed before his mind did: a distant percussion that was not geological, a series of compressed concussions moving through the rock beneath his boots, and then a quality of silence afterward that was different from the usual silence of the plateau. The usual silence of Carroll's Reach had texture, wind, the low mechanical hum of the settlement's power grid, occasional distant equipment. This silence was flat, wiped clean of something. He stood very still beside the antenna for a moment, the calibration tool in his hand, watching the dust basin. Then the figure came out of it. She was moving with the forward-leaning urgency of someone using the last of something, her momentum carrying her more than her legs were. She was tall, taller than any human woman he had seen, and the armor she wore had the articulated, organic geometry of Vaelthari military design, which he recognized from the briefing images the survey company included in frontier postings as a matter of protocol. The briefing images had not prepared him for the reality of it, which was that Vaelthari battle armor, when it has been in actual combat, looks nothing like the formal photographs. It looks like something that has been tested and has partially failed, and the distinction between the armor and the person wearing it becomes, in certain lights, uncomfortably unclear. Her ears were long, swept back in the elegant taper he recognized from the briefing, but the upper tips were torn, and there was a darkness along her left side that the red light of this system made difficult to read accurately, and that he did not want to read too carefully. She reached him. She did not fall, she lowered, with the last disciplined effort of someone who had decided where they were going to stop, and she was looking at him with eyes that were dark and very clear, and which had in them the focused, burning quality of someone who has reduced themselves to a single remaining purpose. He had no medical training beyond the basic frontier certification. He had no weapons. He had a calibration kit and a thermos of cold coffee, and absolutely no preparation for this moment, which was, he would later reflect, perhaps why he did not panic. There was no prepared response to override, so he simply responded, which meant he crouched down to her level and said, with the quiet directness of a person addressing a situation rather than performing a reaction. "I'm here, I can hear you." She spoke first in Vaelthari, then shifted with visible, costly effort to the common tongue, and her accent was heavy but her words were precise, chosen with the deliberateness of someone who had prepared them. "The orange seat," she said. "You must go to the orange seat." "I don't know what that is," he said. "You will find it." She reached into the interior of her armor, a movement that cost her something considerable, and produced a sealed object, small, dark, ovoid, warm in a way that suggested an internal process of some kind. She pressed it into his hand and closed his fingers around it with both of hers, and her grip was stronger than he expected. "Say the word Vaelthari, nothing else, only that word." "Vaelthari," he repeated. "No one else," she said. "No one can know you carry it." He looked at her. He looked at the object in his hand. He looked back at her and he wanted to ask approximately 40 questions, and he understood, from the quality of her eyes and the rate at which her breath was changing, that he had time for none of them. "I understand," he said, which was not true, but was the right answer because it was the answer that let her stop carrying what she had been carrying. Her grip on his hand loosened. Her eyes remained open for a moment longer, clear and distant, looking at something that was not the red-lit plateau of Carol's reach. Then they stilled, and the dust settled around them both in the flat, indifferent way that dust settles, and Tomás Veyra knelt on the edge of the known universe with a warm sealed object in his hand and a word in his head, and the absolute, clarifying silence of a moment that has just become the before. He stayed there for a while, because it seemed wrong to move too quickly. Then he stood, and he put the object in his inner jacket pocket, and he picked up his calibration kit, and he walked back to the settlement, and he finished the antenna repair first because the relay data still needed correcting, and because doing the next right thing in front of you is sometimes the only way to get from one moment to the next without coming apart. The azimuth error resolved cleanly. The data would be accurate tomorrow. He submitted the completion report through the proper channels, went to his quarters, and sat for a long time in the particular silence of a man who has just become something he doesn't have a word for yet. He slept badly and woke early and made coffee with the focused attention of someone who needed the ritual more than the result. And he sat at his small desk with the sealed object in front of him and looked at it in the morning light, which on Carol's reach was the same flat red as every other light, and thought about what he knew and what he didn't. What he knew: a Vaelthari warrior had died on the eastern perimeter. He had not reported this. He understood, with the instinct of a man who had spent years working in remote postings, where the judgment calls were yours because there was no one else to make them, that reporting it immediately would produce a sequence of events he could not control and did not trust. The warrior had been specific. No one could know he carried the object. She had not said no one could know about her, but the logic connected itself. What he didn't know, everything else. The object was sealed completely. No visible seam, no apparent opening mechanism, no marking he could identify. It was warm in a way that did not change, a steady, internal warmth that suggested something active rather than residual. When he held it, he had the faint, irrational impression of something that was aware of being held, which he attributed to the general strangeness of the morning, and declined to examine too closely. He put it in the casing of his primary survey scanner, behind the battery housing, because the scanner casing was large and complicated, and legitimately cluttered with components that any inspection would have to work through, and because he was a field technician and field technicians have a relationship with their equipment that tends to make other people reluctant to reach inside it uninvited. He went to the communal mess for breakfast. He ate. He talked to his colleague Dav, who worked the northern relay line and who was, as usual, primarily interested in discussing the geological readings from Sector 7 and whether they indicated the kind of subsurface formation that would keep the company interested in Carroll's Reach for another contract cycle. Tomás said he thought they probably did. Dav said good, because he just negotiated a new equipment lease, and it would be embarrassing if the whole operation packed up. They agreed that the company would not pack up, finished their coffee, and went to work. The unmarked vessels arrived that afternoon. There were two of them, which Tomás observed from the relay station where he was performing routine maintenance with the specific quality of attention of someone who is watching something carefully while performing the body language of someone who is not. They were Vaelthari configuration, smaller than military patrol vessels, larger than courier craft, sitting in the category of ship that is designed to be difficult to categorize. They landed at the settlement's secondary dock, which the settlement used for supply deliveries, and which was therefore visible from approximately half of the eastern work area. The people who came out of them were in civilian dress, which was the most military thing about them. Tomás watched them cross to the settlement entrance and disappear inside, and then he went back to the relay maintenance. And he did not hurry, because hurrying would have been the wrong thing to do, and because the relay maintenance genuinely needed doing, and because he had found over the years that actual work was the best performance of normalcy, being indistinguishable from the real thing. They found him at the relay station 40 minutes later. Two of them, with a translation unit and the specific, courteous directness of people conducting a search they are not calling a search. They were looking, they explained, for evidence of a military incident in the eastern perimeter area. They understood there might have been disturbances overnight. Had he seen anything unusual? Tomás considered the question with the expression of a man genuinely trying to be helpful. "I heard something yesterday afternoon," he said. "Sounded like it might have been in the dust basin. I assumed it was a geological event. We get subsurface percussion out here sometimes. The formations shift." He paused. "I was working on the antenna, the eastern perimeter one. I didn't see anything." "You found nothing in the perimeter area? No materials, no equipment?" "Nothing," Tomás said. "I can show you my maintenance log. I was there about 3 hours, nothing but rock and dust." They looked at him with the focused, measuring attention of people who are very good at reading people, and he looked back at them with the open, slightly tired face of a field technician who has been awake too early and is being asked about geological percussion events he didn't find very interesting. They thanked him. They spoke to 5 other people in the settlement, none of whom had anything useful because none of them had been on the eastern perimeter. They returned to their ships by early evening. By nightfall the ships were gone. Tomás sat in his quarters and breathed carefully for a while. Then he retrieved the scanner casing and held the sealed object and thought about the word Velindra and about the orange seat, which was not in any database he had access to but which he was now, for reasons he had not chosen and could not unchoose, going to have to find. He opened his personal terminal and began looking, with the methodical patience of a man who has spent his career finding things in places that don't advertise themselves. He searched through navigation charts, trade route registries, administrative station records. He searched through the kinds of databases that frontier technicians accumulate access to over years of postings. The useful, unofficial repositories of information that the proper channels don't contain and don't know they're missing. It took him 4 hours. The orange seat did not appear by name. It appeared as a coordinate, embedded in a trade junction reference, listed as a secondary administrative checkpoint on a freight routing document so comprehensively mundane that it had clearly been designed to be the kind of thing no one read twice. The coordinate placed it 6 transit jumps from Carroll's Reach, at a junction that appeared on every navigation chart, and that he had passed through twice in his surveying career without once thinking about what it contained. He looked at the coordinate for a long time. He thought about his contract, which had 4 months remaining. He thought about his equipment lease, which Dov had mentioned, and which was technically his responsibility. He thought about the proper channels and what they would say if he requested emergency personal leave to follow instructions given to him by a dying alien warrior, the existence of whom he had not reported, in order to deliver an unidentified sealed object to an unlisted location, using a password he had been told not to explain. He put in for emergency personal leave on grounds of a family situation. The proper channels approved it by morning, because the proper channels were busy with something they considered more important, and because Tomás had 19 days of unused leave accumulated, and because no one at Carol's Reach had any particular reason to look at him twice. He packed the scanner casing. He packed his thermos, because 6 transit jumps was a long way, and he was not optimistic about the coffee situation on non-human vessels. He left his quarters the way he always left postings, clean, orderly, everything where it should be, and he walked to the transport dock in the flat red morning light, and he did not look back, because looking back at places you are leaving is only useful if there is something there you have not yet decided. There wasn't. He had decided on the eastern perimeter, kneeling in the dust, saying the only honest thing available, "I understand." He didn't yet, but he was going to. The first transit jump was on a human freight carrier that smelled of processed soy and hydraulic fluid, and which had, in the passenger section, 4 seats and a vending unit offering 11 varieties of protein bar, and a hot beverage that the label described as coffee style, and that Tomás, after one encounter, decided to respect the honesty of the description and leave alone. He drank from his thermos and reviewed navigation charts, and tried not to think too specifically about what he was doing, because thinking too specifically about what he was doing produced a quality of anxiety that was not useful, and he had a long way to go. The second and third jumps were on a Vaelthari transit connector, a long, articulated vessel that moved through its route with the patient efficiency of a system that had been running for decades, and had achieved a kind of institutional indifference to the individuals passing through it. The Vaelthari operator who processed his customs documentation at the second junction checkpoint was a tall, multi-limbed figure who reviewed Tomás's papers with 4 eyes simultaneously and asked him, in excellent common tongue, the purpose of his travel. "Survey consultation," Tomás said, following up on a geological data handoff at the junction station. He had prepared this answer over the course of several transit hours and delivered it with the distracted competence of someone whose mind was already on the work waiting at the other end. The operator looked at him, at his documentation, and at the survey scanner case with the particular expression of a customs official who has processed enough freight technicians to find them comprehensively uninteresting. He stamped the transit approval and moved to the next passenger, which was exactly the response Tomás had been hoping for, and which confirmed, again, that the warrior had made a reasonable choice of courier. The Vaelthari vessel's passenger lounge offered food at regular intervals, served by an automated system that moved through the car on a track and presented options on a rotating display. At the third service, Tomás accepted something that the display described, in common tongue translation, as a savory pressed cake, which was accurate in the sense that it had been pressed, and which was accompanied by a small cup of something warm and faintly luminescent that the display called a comfort beverage. He looked at it. It looked back at him in the way that luminescent things sometimes seem to. He drank it carefully. It tasted like warm honey and something else, something his palate had no reference for, and it was actually quite good, and he felt obscurely guilty about his low expectations. The fourth and fifth jumps were shorter, connector routes between junction stations. the kind of transit infrastructure that exists because trade routes require it, and that has the functional, unloved quality of a thing that was built to work rather than to be experienced. He slept for part of the fifth jump, which surprised him, and woke with the specific disorientation of a person who has fallen asleep in a place and time that didn't seem to allow for it. The sixth jump delivered him to the junction at the coordinate he had found in the freight routing document, and he came through the arrival terminal of what the station registry listed as Juno Point Administrative Relay, a secondary checkpoint on the Vaelthari trade corridor, and stood for a moment in the terminal's main concourse, which looked exactly like what it claimed to be. Functional, unremarkable, busy with the transit traffic of a junction that existed because geography required it, and not because anyone had chosen it. He took a seat in the concourse and studied the station's layout diagram on his personal terminal, and ate the last of the protein bars from his bag, and thought about how to find a place that was not listed as a place. He found it by walking. Not aimlessly, he walked the station's secondary access corridors, the maintenance routes that paralleled the main transit lines, the kind of passages that a freight technician with a survey scanner case could walk without drawing any particular attention. He was looking for a door that was different without advertising its difference, a section of the station that had the quality he had learned, over years of frontier work, to recognize in structures that contain more than they present. He found it on the station's fourth level, in a corridor that the directory listed as Administrative Services, a stretch of offices and processing rooms that were active enough to look staffed and quiet enough to suggest the staff were not doing anything that required observation. At the end of the corridor was a door that was the same material and color as every other door on the level, and which had, beside it, a panel that was indistinguishable from a standard access reader, except that the panel had no scanner aperture. It was not reading anything. It was waiting to be spoken to. Tomás stood in front of it for a moment. The corridor was empty. The station hummed around him with the neutral industry of a place that processed transit and asked no questions. He thought about a woman dying in red dust and her clear eyes, and the grip of her hands closing his fingers around something she had carried far enough. "Velendra," he said. The door opened. The corridor beyond it was different. Not dramatically, not the cinematic transformation of hidden places in stories, where the secret interior announces itself in contrast to the mundane exterior. It was subtler than that, and more convincing. The materials were older, the light was warmer, the architecture had the accumulated specificity of a place that had been adapted to use over time, rather than designed for a single purpose. It had the feeling of something that had been lived in, worked in, thought in, something that had shaped itself around the people who inhabited it rather than requiring them to inhabit its shape. Two figures were waiting in the corridor. They were Vaelthari's civilian dress, no ceremonial markings, with the quiet, prepared quality of people who were not surprised to see him but had not been certain he would come. They said nothing. They gestured. He followed them. The room they brought him to was not a throne room. It contained a desk that was covered in the organized density of an active working surface, documents in several formats, data screens showing information in Vaelthari script and in common tongue, a half-finished cup of something warm at the corner. Two chairs faced the desk from the visitor's side. Behind the desk, a woman was looking at something on a screen with the focused attention of someone mid-thought, and she finished the thought before she looked up, which told Tomás something about her before she said anything. Her ears were long and tapered, unadorned, no threading, no ceremonial marking. She looked in the absence of those markers like someone who had deliberately chosen not to wear the things that would tell you what she was, which was itself a very specific thing to choose. She was perhaps 40 by human estimation, though he understood Vaelthari aging ran differently, and she had the particular composure of someone who had been in the same room with very large problems for a very long time and had developed, not immunity to them, but a working relationship. She looked at him, at the scanner case, at him again. "You're not what I expected," she said, in common tongue without preamble. "I get that a lot lately," Tomás said. Something shifted in her expression that was not quite a smile and was clearly not nothing. "Sit down," she said. "You've come a long way, and I have a great deal to tell you, and I suspect you have coffee in that thermos that you would like to finish before it gets worse." "It's already bad," he said, sitting, "but yes." "Then drink it," she said, "and let me tell you what you're carrying." Her name was Selvaine, and she told it to him plainly, without title or context, in the way that people who have operated without titles for long enough sometimes forget to offer them and sometimes do it deliberately, and are almost always doing both at once. She told him what the object was first, because she understood. He could see her understanding it, watching him as she spoke, that a man who had carried something 6 transit jumps without knowing what it contained had earned the right to know before he earned anything else. The object was a data vessel, Vaelthari manufacture, sealed to a specific biological and vocal signature that had now been passed to him through physical transfer and the spoken key, which meant that he and Selvaine were currently the only 2 entities in the surveyed galaxy who could open it. This was by design. This was also, she said, with the flat precision of someone describing a weather pattern, why the people who had sent the search team to Carol's Reach had not found what they were looking for, and why they would be, by now, recalibrating. "Recalibrating to what?" Tomás asked. "To the possibility that it reached me," she said, "which means they will move faster than they had planned, which means we have less time than I would prefer." She told him about herself in the same incremental, functional way. Not a confession, not an explanation, but a briefing, which he appreciated because it respected the fact that he needed the information to operate rather than to be impressed. She had been the organizing intelligence behind the Vaelthari political structure for 22 years. She had held no public title for any of them because public titles made you legible, and legibility, in the kind of work she did, was a liability she could not afford. The figurehead positions, the ceremonial roles, the visible architecture of power. She had constructed all of it carefully, and she maintained it carefully, and she operated from behind it the way a structural engineer operates from behind a building. Invisibly, essentially, and with the understanding that the building only stands because someone is doing the work no one sees. The threat she had been tracking for the past 14 months was a coordinated political move by 3 factions. She named them in Vaelthari and gave him the common tongue equivalents, who had independently reached the same conclusion. That the treaty architecture she had spent 2 decades building was the primary obstacle to their respective ambitions, and that if they moved simultaneously, the response time would be insufficient to counter all 3 at once. The data vessel contained the confirmation of their coordination, the evidence that what had appeared to be 3 separate political pressures was, in fact, a single orchestrated strategy. With it, she could move. Without it, she had a theory and no proof, and theories without proof in interstellar politics were, she said, the same as nothing and sometimes worse. "The warrior who brought it to you," Tomás said. "She was your courier." "My most trusted one," Selvaine said, and for a moment something moved through her composure that was not grief exactly, but was the thing that lives in the same territory. The acknowledgement of a cost that has been paid and cannot be disputed. She had been extracting the data from a source embedded in one of the 3 factions for 4 months. She completed the extraction 6 days ago. She was returning. She didn't make it all the way back. "She made it far enough," Selvaine said, and looked at him directly when she said it, and he understood that this was not a consolation but a precise statement of fact, which was her way of honoring things. He placed the scanner case on the desk and opened it, and retrieved the sealed object from behind the battery housing, and set it between them. It was still warm. Selvaine looked at it with the focused attention of someone in the presence of something they have been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become its own wait, and the arrival of the thing requires a moment to recalibrate around. "How do we open it?" he asked. She told him. It required both of them, his voice and hers, a specific sequence, a physical contact point on the object's surface that was not visible until you knew where to press. She talked him through it with the patience of someone who had designed the system, and understood that explaining it to someone encountering it for the first time required precision, rather than speed. They opened it together, which felt, in the quiet of that room, like the appropriate way to open something that had cost what this had cost. The data it released populated Selvaine's screens in a cascade of information that she read with the rapid, total attention of someone who has been waiting for a specific confirmation, and is now receiving it with all of the implications that confirmation carries. Tomás watched her read and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and because he had learned, over 6 transit jumps and a significant recalibration of his understanding of his own life, that silence was sometimes the most functional thing available. She was quiet for a long time after she finished reading. Then she said, "It's everything I needed." "Good," he said. "It will take me approximately 30 hours to deploy it correctly," she said. "The sequencing matters. If I move against all 3 factions simultaneously, they lose the ability to coordinate a response. If I move against them in the wrong order, the remaining ones have time to act." She was already reaching for a second screen, pulling up what appeared to be a communication architecture of considerable complexity. During those 30 hours, this station is going to become a more interesting place than it has been. How interesting? The factions know the data was extracted. They know it was in transit. They know their search team found nothing at the frontier settlement. She looked at him. They will determine within hours that it arrived here, and they will send someone to confirm that conclusion. Tomás thought about this. He thought about the corridor outside with its administrative services camouflage, and the door with no scanner aperture, and the quality of the station's ordinary business moving above and around this room like weather around a fixed point. "How many people in this station know what this room is?" he asked. 12, she said, "plus you. And the people they send, they'll look for a Vaelthari political target, a figure with authority." "Yes." "They won't look for a human freight technician," he said. She stopped moving. She looked at him with the full weight of her attention, which was the kind of attention that had spent 22 years seeing things before they announced themselves, and which recognized in this moment the specific shape of what he was offering. "No," she said carefully, "they won't." "Tell me what you need," he said. What she needed was a carrier, someone who could move between the station's public levels and the administrative corridor, without drawing the attention that any of her 12 people would draw, because her 12 people, however carefully cover-storied, had been in and out of this station long enough to have accumulated the kind of observable patterns that a sophisticated search would find. What she needed was someone new, someone whose presence on the station had a clean and verifiable explanation, a survey technician following up on a geological data handoff, and who could carry a physical message to the station's public communications office on level 2 without the message being traceable to Selvaine's network. The message, when she wrote it, was 3 lines. It went to a specific address in Vaelthari public administrative records. It contained, in the dry language of administrative correspondence, a meeting request that was not a meeting request, which would be understood by its recipient as the signal to begin a process that Selvaine had designed 14 months ago and had been waiting, with the particular patience of someone who cannot afford impatience, to initiate. Tomás read the message. He put it in his jacket pocket. He picked up his scanner case, which was now empty of everything except the equipment it was supposed to contain, and he walked out of the room and down the corridor and through the door that looked like every other door. And he took the maintenance route back to the station's main concourse, and he found the public communications office on level 2, which was busy and bright and staffed by 2 operators who processed transit correspondence with the efficient disinterest of people for whom messages were throughput rather than content. He sent the message. He paid the standard fee. He got a receipt, which he folded and put in his pocket next to where the message had been. Then he bought a protein bar from the concourse vendor and sat in the main seating area and watched the transit traffic move through the station with the unhurried attention of a field technician between connections, which was exactly what he appeared to be, and which was close enough to true that he didn't have to perform it very hard. The people who arrived 4 hours later came through the main terminal with the civilian dress, focused movement quality of the search team at Carroll's Reach, and they moved through the concourse doing what search teams do, which is look at everything except the thing that looks most ordinary. They looked at Tomás once. He was eating a protein bar and reviewing what appeared to be geological survey data on his terminal, which was exactly what he was doing, because Selvaine had sent him the Sector 7 readings from Carroll's Reach as cover material, and because he was, genuinely, interested in whether Dov's subsurface formation theory held up. They moved on. 31 hours after Tomás Veyra sat down in that room with a warm sealed object and an empty thermos, Selvaine deployed the evidence in the precise sequence she had determined, and the three factions discovered simultaneously that the coordination they had kept hidden for 14 months was now visible to every party in the treaty architecture, and that the political ground they had been building toward had, in the space of a morning, become untenable. It did not happen loudly. It happened the way Selvaine did most things, in the correct order, at the correct moment, without performance. She found Tomás in the concourse 2 hours after it was done. She sat across from him with the particular quality of a person who has just set down something very heavy and is noticing, for the first time in a while, what it feels like to have empty hands. "It's done," she said. "I know," he said. "The traffic pattern in the concourse changed about an hour ago. The search teams left." She looked at him with the measuring attention he had come to recognize. "You noticed that?" "I notice things," he said. "I'm a field technician. We spend a lot of time in places where the thing that's about to go wrong is the only thing in the environment that's behaving differently." She was quiet for a moment. "What will you do now?" He thought about Carroll's Reach, and the relay antenna, and Dov and the Sector 7 readings, and the 4 months remaining on his contract. He thought about the proper channels, which would have an approved emergency personal leave on record and no idea why. He thought about a woman in red dust with clear eyes and a specific kind of last clarity. "Go back," he said. "Finish my contract. The Sector 7 formation data is genuinely interesting, and someone should follow up on it properly." Selvaine looked at him for a long moment. "You understand," she said, "that what you did in the past 30 hours will not appear in any record. There is no version of the official account in which your name is present." "I know," he said. "That doesn't trouble you." He considered this with the honest brevity it deserved. "The antenna on the eastern perimeter was misaligned for 11 days, he said. "I fixed it. The data's been running clean since." Nobody wrote a report about that either. He picked up his scanner case. "Things work or they don't. I'd rather they worked." She stood when he stood, which felt like a form of respect that did not require a name. She did not offer her hand, because Vaelthari formal custom did not involve the gesture, and he did not offer his, because he had finally read enough of the briefing document to know that. They stood across from each other in the ordinary light of an ordinary concourse on a station that the galaxy passed through without looking at, and she said, "Safe transit, Tomás Veyra." "Thank you," he said, "for the coffee direction more than anything." Something broke open in her expression then, fully, briefly, the genuine and unmanaged version of the thing that had been present and contained since the first moment he'd sat down in her room. She laughed, and it was the laugh of a person who has not had occasion to laugh in some time and finds it, unexpectedly, still available. He walked to the transit terminal. He found his connector to the first of 6 jumps. He settled into his seat, opened his terminal to the Sector 7 geological data, and began reading with the focused patience of a man who does his work, because the work is worth doing, and who finds, in this, a sufficiency that most people spend their lives looking for in larger things. The station hummed around him,